Hey, what's up? I'm Jim Bauer from Odyssey BMX, and you're on RideBMX.com. And I'm going to show you how to put a bottom bracket, a mid-bottom bracket, into a modern-day BMX bike. So this here is everything that comes with a modern-day mid-bottom bracket. You have your two bearings, your spacer, a very important part that goes in between your bearings, your dust cap, which is not always necessary depending on your application. But here are your spacers that are always necessary depending on your application. So this is everything you need to install your bottom bracket. This is a quick explanation of all the different kinds of bearings and bottom brackets you can have in a BMX bike. The way it used to be was an American bottom bracket, which was this oversized part, which is kind of an antiquated design designed for one-piece cranks back in the day. So most American bottom brackets are an aluminum collar with a bearing pushed into it that you then push into your oversized American bottom bracket. Nowadays, most people have resorted to using a mid-bottom bracket, which is no aluminum cup with just the bearing pressed directly into the frame. Those come in any range of sizes, but the two typical ones are 19 millimeter and 22 millimeter, which is the inner diameter right here. So it just depends on how big the cranks you're going to install is. But either one of these can be interchanged into an American bottom bracket for the most part. There's one other size that's very similar to the mid, and that's the Spanish bottom bracket, which is the same exact kind of installation, which is just a bearing. It's just a different size bearing. Those are a little bit harder to find, and frames are harder to come by, but that's just the one other option you might run into. Most BMX bikes today have decided to go with this mid-bottom bracket outer diameter. And this one right here is just one other option, which is a Euro, which is threaded in just like a road bike or old mountain bikes. It's kind of antiquated, and I don't think that many people use it other than maybe race applications, but that's one more option that you might find getting a frame out there today. But we're going to concentrate on 22 millimeter mid-bottom bracket, which is what we make for our 12-bolt cranks with 22 millimeter spindle. All right, we're going to install the mid-bottom bracket in this frame over here. First thing you always need to do in installing bearings is apply grease. Grease makes everything go together better, makes everything last longer, makes things not rust. People always forget to do it, but grease is probably the most important part of putting any bike together. So we're just going to put some inside your bottom bracket on both sides. Anywhere where metal is going to come in contact with metal, you want to put grease. The only problem with bottom brackets is there's still the one piece of your bike that you need to kind of hammer in, whereas headsets back in the day have changed to totally just drop-in technology, and now you still kind of have to muscle a bottom bracket in, but mid-bottom brackets and most of the tools will help you do it pretty easily. This is a homemade kind of bottom bracket or headset tool that's just made to compress the bearings in. You don't need to use this. You can use a hammer, but something like this is going to help you probably not damage your bearings installing them and help you line them up a little bit better. So what you do is you can work one at a time. You can do two at a time. I like to go one at a time to make sure each bearing is seated properly. So what you do is you use your tool like this or hammer if that's all you have, and you put one bearing in at a time. We're going to start with this side, installing it on this Federal Bikes frame. So far I can kind of feel how it's going to go in, so it feels like Federal did a pretty good job making this bottom bracket round. That's one problem, is in the welding manufacture of your frame, this your bottom bracket shell can get out of round, which is going to make it extra hard for you to put your bearings in. Also going to make, sometimes after the welding process, you're going to have the bearings maybe not line up. It's just problems. Every frame is different, and some frames are post weld machined, which means after it's all welded, they then machine this race. That's the best way to do it, but any frame will pretty much work as long as you take your time and you get your bottom bracket, your bearings in there flat and smooth. So this one basically works with two wrenches at the same time. Like anything else, you're basically just tightening these nuts until your bearing's pushed all the way in. So as you can see, as I slowly spin this in, it's pressing that bearing straight into the frame. And this is going in pretty easily, which means this frame has got a nice bottom bracket and it was built pretty well. So it's not, you don't want to muscle it, you don't want to push on that bearing too much, because anytime you push the middle race and the outside race apart from each other, you're damaging your bearing. But that one went in real smooth, so I'm excited that this is going to work pretty well. Now you basically repeat the same process on the other side of the bike. But one major thing that people kind of forget is this spacer. This spacer is the only thing holding your two bearings from imploding from the pressure that your cranks are putting on it. This spacer is really important. Some people get annoyed, don't want to put it in, think it's an unnecessary piece, but it's basically the only thing holding your bearings apart. And your cranks are going to spin better, and they're going to last way longer if you install this center spacer in between. Some people want to take it out and make their cranks not spin as good. Let's say you're doing a lot of tail whips or something like that, and you want your cranks to stay in one place. Some people take this out to make your cranks spin worse. So that's all personal preference, but your bearings are definitely not going to last as long if you take that out. So it's up to you. I always like my cranks to spin as smooth as possible, so I always have them in there. We're going to install this bearing the same way we did as the other side. Just going to put it on our tool, and this time, since it's the second bearing, we need to put our spacer in between, because there's no way to put the spacer in after you have both your bearings in. So line it up and just basically tighten this big bolt, and it's going to pull this bearing in also. Like I said before, you can do this process with a hammer, but it's just not going to be as smooth, and you risk so much damage with your bike. If you don't have this tool that you see I'm using right here, you could pretty much make it out of anything you can buy at Home Depot. I'm actually pretty sure we bought all these pieces at Home Depot and made this thing a while ago. So that looks like that went in really smooth. Again, this bottom bracket is shaped really well, and they did a good job building it. It's not very deformed. So right now, the bearings are flush with the ends of our bottom bracket with our spacer in the middle. And now we're ready to install whatever cranks we want through this bottom bracket. Every bottom bracket is different. Sometimes you might have a hair more of the bearing sticking out. Sometimes it might be sunken in a little bit. It's basically every single bike frame is made differently. So depending on, it's not a fact it's going to line up flush like this bike did. Depending on what kind of frame you have, it might be in or out a little bit. As long as you're not forcing it in any way or not pushing it in enough, you should be all right. Now you got your bottom bracket in there, you should be ready to install your cranks. We did it pretty smooth. We didn't beat on the bearings at all, so hopefully when we put our cranks on, they're going to spin really fast and really smooth.